Welcome to the fifth in our series of workshops on developing the next generation of research leaders for sustainable development. WUN is offering the series in collaboration with UNESCO and with the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. The workshops are intended to help enlarge the networking opportunities for researchers in the early stages of their careers. And an important part of WUN's mission is to nurture research talent. Historically, we've done that through a mobility program aimed at early career researchers. That program, along with many of the other means by which researchers typically establish their collaborative networks, has of course been upended by COVID-19. This series of workshops is a response to that. They're intended to help researchers find peers and potential collaborators who have related interests. But we're not viewing the workshops as just a stopgap until life gets back to normal. If the workshops are a success, we will have created a vehicle for enlarging opportunity generally, and especially for researchers whose freedom to collaborate internationally has in the past been limited by financial or other restrictions on travel. The emphasis on the SDGs, and each workshop will explore one and the research challenges that attend it, stems from WUN's adoption of sustainable development as the principal research focus of its strategic plan. Later in this session, I'll say more about the particulars of our research agenda and the ways in which you can become involved in it. But first we'll hear from two distinguished guests who will characterize some of the rich research challenges and opportunities presented by SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. As Aoife mentioned, we hope there will be a little time for questions after the remarks from our speakers. And if you'd like to ask a question as you listen to the presentations, please use the chat function to the right of your screen, and we'll take the questions at the end of the presentations. Our first speaker is Mr. Oliver Chinganya, Director of the African Center for Statistics of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA. He is a chartered statistician with wide experience and knowledge of statistical practice across Africa at both the national and international levels. He has a wealth of experience in delivering statistical development results for Africa and is a strong believer in the effectiveness of partnerships. Prior to joining UNECA in 2016, he held senior leadership roles at the African Development Bank as manager for the Statistical Capacity Building Division, at the International Monetary Fund as a regional advisor, and at the Zambia Statistical Office as deputy director. Mr. Chinganya is also vice president-elect of the International Statistical Institute, a prestigious global body of statisticians. Mr. Chinganya, please activate your camera as you begin your remarks.
Thank you, Peter, for that really elaborate introduction and for having me. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone that is connected to this platform. I'm very pleased to participate in this early career research network and workshop series on developing the next generation of research leaders for sustainable development. Let me start by considering the value of the multilateral collaboration in addressing the SDG 8, which is the issue that is being discussed here, and I'll be focusing much more on Africa. Most African countries are dominated by primarily the commodity exports and characterized by inadequate per capita growth, highly volatile growth, high rates of vulnerable employment and informality. Job creation and economic growth depend on local as well as global factors such as access to financing, technology, international markets, and foreign direct investment. As a result, global norms and regulatory frameworks that govern trade, access to technology, intellectual property rights, and taxation of multinational, for instance, have measurable impacts on the domestic growth and employment. And therefore, multilateral collaboration is critical in facilitating access to finance, ensuring access to markets, and minimizing illicit financial flow, including ensuring that firms pay taxes in jurisdictions where goods and services are produced. This is critical in the achievement of SDG 8 in developing countries and in particular in Africa. International collaboration, particularly in the area of science, technology, and mathematics, as well as the digital service, can improve productivity and expand opportunities for value addition for the continent's rich endowments of natural resources, including its so-called green minerals. Multilateral collaboration, in our view, I think, can also hasten the benefits of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which I believe most of you have heard of here in Africa, by enhancing access to infrastructure and productive capacities. In terms of multilateral or international research collaboration, that can be effective in addressing the challenges related to SDG 8. For Africa, multilateral or international research collaboration between researchers on the continent and the best researchers in the world, based on research agreements, would support the implementation of common research in areas of interest and importance to Africa, enhancing innovation and the country's economic growth and employment. In particular, the COVID-19 pandemic has underlined the importance of health to economic growth and employment and development. International research collaboration in the area of health can position the continent in the forefront of medical innovations in the global response to emerging diseases and pandemics. Such collaborations could assist in patterning and as well as scaling production of indigenous herbal products for exports for global markets, thereby creating much needed jobs on the continent. Africa has the lowest research and development expenditure, about 8.6% of the GDP. It has the lowest high technology exports, about 0.3% of manufacturing exports, and the highest unemployment rate, around 7.8% of the total labor force, compared to other regions. I think that multilateral or international research collaboration can focus on increasing the research and development expenditure on the priority areas, thereby improving high technology exports and productivity with significant spillover effects on countries' growth and employment. Another area that I think would be useful would be the area of research on how to tackle the significant informality in the labor market. The formalization of the informal sector is somewhat blunt policy instrument. Collaborative research on how to transform and enhance the productive capacities of the informal sector would be beneficial. The fourth industrial revolution and the global shift from the labor intensity to knowledge intensity affects both the supply and demand features of employment. The research on the employment effects of digitization has been sparse and of a normative nature. A more granular sector-specific analysis would be assist in a better addressing the opportunities and challenges arising from the SDG 8 for embracing digital technologies. However, there are areas of opportunity which early career researchers can pursue within SDG 8, and I want to cover a few of them. One, I think that low total government spending in social protection and employment programs, and the low coverage and inadequate transfers, and its dependence on social assistance and general taxation is physically unsustainable. How to shift from non-contributory or to contributory schemes could be an important area to assist in devising effective policies. Leveraging on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and these complementary protocols of labor mobility across national boundaries in pursuit of job opportunities, as well as the contribution to the country's structural transformation and growth, is another area. There is a need for more research on how to leverage the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement to achieve the inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for all. The changing labor market profile demanding technical and problem-solving skills, which requires a recalibration of education and training programs with emphasis on the role and influence of digital technologies. In Africa, for instance, as well as elsewhere, governments are beginning to plan for the recovery from the COVID-19 crisis, particularly from the economic devastation of the pandemic, which it has actually brought in several of our economies. But if that recovery is not green, resilient, and just, the continent will emerge more scarred economically, socially, and environmentally, and more vulnerable to the next crisis that may come along. The green economy and the green jobs are a means of achieving the goal of sustainable development, rather than being ends in themselves, since the need of attention, the attention of the researchers. In my conclusion, I see 4 areas that I would want to recommend to the next generation of researchers interested in SDG. And one of them, I think, is the centrality of employment creation in development. I think the researcher will, have an opportunity to actually research and see how they can place employment to make sure that people have, attain the necessary life that is required in terms of well-being and so forth. The second one, I think that a combination of macro and micro studies on employment in Africa would be one area that the researchers interested in this SDG 8 could also look at. The third, I think the role, which I've already mentioned, around the research and development, as well as the digital technologies making African economies competitive. I think research and development, you've noticed that the amount or the investment that goes into this area relative to the GDP is very low, and Africa is actually sitting at the bottom of it. And finally, I think that the structured transformation, economic diversification, labor productivity, resilience to external shocks and development on the continent will be one of those areas that the researchers that are interested really in SDG 8 could look at, and these are some of the issues that I want to leave at the table for thoughts for the researchers and those that are listening to this call. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oliver, for that very engaging and comprehensive account of the major issues and the research opportunities they represent. We're having a little trouble connecting with our other speaker, Dr. Borini, and I wonder if, while we're waiting for that, you would be willing to take some questions which Aoife would put to you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I'm going to put a couple of questions to you at a time, if that is okay. The first one is, what are the key milestones we need to meet in this UN Decade of Action to realise SDG 8? And the second one is, how has the pandemic shifted the landscape in being able to achieve these milestones?
Thank you.
Thank you.
On the milestones and how to achieve the SDGs, I think for the continent, first of all, I think we are seriously challenged in terms of meeting the SDGs, and not only SDG 8, but various other SDGs as well. And I think one of the things that needs to be put in place really is to identify what I would call as accelerators, identifying accelerators in each of the countries on how they could move in meeting the milestone within this particular SDG on decent work and economic growth. And I think one of those things really is, first of all, aligning the policies around decent work and economic growth to the national development plans. It's not very clear yet in some of these countries whether there's a proper alignment in terms of policies to be able to attain the SDG 8. I think it's critical, given the 9 years that are remaining before 2030, that countries really put the necessary resources to improve people's lives, to move people from in jobs that are green, in jobs that are environmentally friendly, but also in jobs that are sustainable. And I think that's very critical. To me, the real issue is identifying the accelerators and the right policies that government must put in place. What has COVID, unfortunately, in many places, in as much as it has also brought opportunities, it has also brought a lot of challenges. We have seen in a number of countries, citizens losing their jobs, moving in jobs that they actually never even thought about. So I think that the opportunity that COVID brings is how we move away from the traditional way of doing things, perhaps by moving into technological areas, where we have seen there's a lot of capacity and of growth in that area. And I think that's a big opportunity. And I think if there's a sector that has performed extremely very well during this COVID era, is the technology area, digitalization of the processes. I think that's an opportunity. In as much as we've seen this devastation process across the continent. But also I think that one of the things that we can benefit out of this crisis of COVID is that now we have a better reach and a means that can be put in place by government to get the information that they need at the lowest level. But again, we need the researchers. We need the people that have the information to dig a little bit more to be able to inform the processes and also advise the government in terms of what needs to be done.
Thank you. I have a couple more questions. The first one is a follow-up. So you mentioned that it's the technology sector that has been able to grow the most during the pandemic. Has that exacerbated regional inequalities and created new challenges for economic growth in certain places? And the second question,
yes. Sorry.
No, please go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, no, that's very true. I mean, we have seen in some cases where it exacerbated the situation by creating a bigger gap of inequalities, because the people that are living in far places where there's little internet, access to some of the facilities much less. But at the same time, what it has also done is that it has given the governments a much more opportunity and impetus for them to actually invest and get closer to the community, and by putting the necessary infrastructure that is required. So it is a two-way. Yes, in some areas we have seen really a situation getting worse, the gaps getting bigger, the inequalities being unexplained. But at the same time, we've also seen a situation where governments are putting much more resources to invest, because they need to inform the people of what is going on to be able to manage the COVID.
Thank you. And another question we have is, how can we best diversify effective policies across national boundaries to achieve economic growth?
Diversification of policies. Fortunately, at ECA, we do have what we call, we have a statutory arrangements, which is a meeting that calls all ministers of finance to meet together from all countries, all the member countries of the UN. And in various areas also, we do have what I call statutory meetings or committees where countries' experts meet. And I think that if we were to diversify, we would use this platform for the discussion, so that people will be able to learn what's going on in other countries in terms of the policies that they're developing, to learn on what is working in terms of sharing best practices, sharing knowledge, and to be able to put the necessary resources as based on learning on the practices that they've learned from others. This morning I had an opportunity to visit one of the companies that is manufacturing mobile phones in Kigali, where I am at the moment. And one of the things I learned from there was that there were a lot of parts that go into that mobile phones that are manufactured from elsewhere. None of those parts actually manufactured from African countries. So perhaps as part of diversifying and thinking about policies, can other countries begin to think of how they can manufacture some of those parts that go into the mobile phones? And it means to do that is diversification of policies, sharing of ideas and how to do that. So I think there are opportunities using the platform that we have at ECA, but also at the African Union, there's a similar platform where heads of states also meet. We feed into those platforms, and I think there's an opportunity to share and come up with strategies which countries can use and develop their own policies at country to inform their own development processes.
Thank you. Our next question is, sustainable employment creation is of course a challenge, but having the right human capital is another. Are measures being taken in Africa in that direction?
Yeah, this is a process that and quite a challenging an issue, but I think there are efforts that are being made through different forums to ensure that we have sustainable employment, but not just sustainable, but employment that is green as well. So we do have several programs within the ECA, and one of the divisions that really focuses on greening economies, ensuring that they create sustainable employment. But again, with the COVID, the dynamics have changed. So the thinking has to be a little bit different now. Because some of those jobs we thought were sustainable, they are no longer sustainable. The situation has changed. So there is a lot of rethinking in terms of developing new approaches, new strategies on how to develop mechanism of ensuring that you have sustainable employment on the continent. And especially in the area of technology, I think that's why we are seeing a lot of possibilities. We're seeing a lot of potential in that area. But also, we're also seeing potential in the area of agriculture. Because one of the things we have also learned during the COVID is that import of food from outside the continent became minimal. It means that we needed to diversify and think a way of growing some of the food within the continent. So we have seen an increase in agriculture, particularly food production that is produced locally. So that's another area I think that you can have both sustainable employment, but also use green technology to ensure that the environment is protected.
Thank you. And we have one final question. How can university research influence the multilateral agenda in relation to SDG 8? How can our research connect with policymakers?
Yes, a very good question. And in the work that I've been doing on statistics, we've been thinking about how do we bridge between what I call development statistics and the statistics from academia. Many times, when we talk about the work that they do at the university, you don't see much relation with what the development statisticians do. So I think that the one way of creating this link is to get the academia participate in the platforms that are about at EC, at AUC. And we've started that, for instance, from the statistical point of view, to reach out to some universities to use the data science approaches, the big data approaches, and university, the academia, they have the capacity, they have the tools. And I think there's need for them to begin to speak to the policymakers and go down to begin to speak to the experts who will be able to implement that. And that link is very, very important. I think the time now is now. Also, the other component that is needed to be put in place is the private sector. Is that in as much as the academians are talking to the policymakers, you also need the people that have resources and the capacity, and those ones will be the private sector. I think the private sector will play a major role in SDG 8 if they can work together with the academia, the policymakers, and the national development planners at country level to be able to respond and ensure that we're able to meet the SDG 8 by 2030.
Mr. Chinganya, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. I'll now hand back over to Peter Lenny to continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Aoife. Unfortunately, we've not been able to connect with Dr. Boarini, so we'll move on. If she's able to join us at some later point, we'll bring her back into the discussion. I'd like to thank Mr. Chinganya for framing the issues so clearly, for identifying the major research problems and the opportunities that arise from them, and of course for very illuminating answers to questions. Thank you very much. Now, as background to the breakout workshops, I'd like very briefly to tell you about WUN's research agenda, what's distinctive about it, and the opportunities to engage with it, so that you can have these in mind as you get together for discussion. The key attribute that WUN can bring to the table is the diversity of its member universities. They are all major research universities that sit in very different geographical, cultural, and legal contexts that not only shape how they support research and deliver education, but also provide them with distinctive, varied perspectives on many important research problems. WUN adds value because, by capitalizing on the varied geographies and cultures of its members, it can assemble and support diverse teams of collaborators to tackle major research problems in fields where comparative analysis matters. So how do you become engaged? Can I have the next slide, please? We welcome your engagement in our programs. The network provides a wide conduit of interesting and sometimes surprising international research collaborations. Many of them address real-world problems and offer opportunities for researchers to deploy their disciplinary expertise in new ways. So how can you become engaged and in what we do? WUN's principal mechanism for supporting research is the Research Development Fund, a small grants program to seed collaborative work that we hope leads to major continuing projects. The WUN website has pages covering current and previous projects. There's an annual competition that opens in July and closes in October, and that supports work under the large umbrella of sustainable development. Early career researchers are eligible to apply for these awards, so we encourage you to explore opportunities for collaboration in your breakout sessions. We organize our research activities through 4 global challenge steering groups in which you can also become engaged. Beyond the Research Development Fund, they also organize workshops on larger collaborative projects within their domains. And there are 4 of these: understanding cultures, public health, responding to climate change, and global higher education and research. So if your interests fall under the broad umbrella that I've just been constructing, do please engage with us and take advantage of the opportunities that WUN can offer. Now, very quickly before we move to the breakout, I want to give you some information about how to connect with us. Can I have the next slide, please? The first thing you can do is sign up to the WUN Hub on our website. This is a platform for WUN researchers to search and connect with colleagues or ongoing WUN research projects. Also, under the Research tab on our website, you can find information on how to contact our Global Challenge steering groups. Also, each WUN university has a local coordinator whose details are available on the governance page of our website. Coordinators are very important conduits and are happy to help you launch your engagement in WUN. We'll of course also send a follow-up email summarizing these ways to engage. And finally, our WUN Secretariat staff are happy to answer questions you might have on opportunities to engage. During the breakout workshop sessions that we're about to start, there's a room called WUN Information where our staff can answer your questions. Thank you for joining us, and I wish you a successful engagement with your partners in our breakout rooms and subsequently. Thank you.